thanks everyone who joined us. And so this kind of started because it's kind of been a interest of mine. Our institution, like I'm sure lots of other institutions, really kind of struggle with how to contact underserved populations. So I happened to be Googling this one day, and I came across Himar Hernandez article on the Chronicle of Higher Education, and I contacted him, and he was kind enough to actually decide to agree to do a ACE webinar with us. And in fact, he even brought along a friend, Kameron Middlebrooks, with the Minority Business Coordinator at Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. And Himar is, let me get this right, see if I can do it. Your title is State Assistant Director for Community and Economic Development at Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. Got to take a deep breath on that one. Well, I don't want to take up any more of your time, so I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Craig, and you took care of slide number 1. So I will just move on to the next one, and we do have some learning objectives, and I'll let Cam take on that one.
All right, thank you, Martin. Thank you all for having me. The learning objectives are pretty straightforward. We want to identify who you're missing out on, learn about suggested best practices to the outreach audiences, establish and develop trust with new audiences, and ideas on how to grow your cultural competency for the work that you do within your extension life.
So, obviously, we didn't want to assume that everybody knew about land-grant institution or extension. And so it is in our blood to be inclusive and to solve issues in the community. And obviously what the community looks now, it's probably not what it looked in 1862, and it's not what it's going to look like 100 years from now. And so it's ever changing. And so that's where the discussion of being relevant and being aware of who makes up our community, and this is something I think sometimes, some communities or some institutions look at race or maybe immigrant status, and we want you to think more broad than that of who's missing in your program. It could be urban. It could be that you're missing the urban kids in your program. It could be that you're missing a segment income-wise, or it could be that you have participants from a school district and none from the next one next to it. So and so if you want to look at history, it's very very cool. The Morrill Act, and then obviously which was the birth of the land grant institution. And then obviously with the Smith-Lever Act of 1914, and that's where obviously the language of cooperative extension. So if nothing else, for selfish reasons, we should be inclusive. But that's not where we're gonna stop, right? So with the state relevant, this is our map of Iowa. And again, in this case, I put the Latino percentage of population because that's mostly who I work with. I also work with refugees, but Latino, that was how I initially got to extension 12 years ago. And at that time, we had, as you can see, very change in population and very fast, and mostly in rural communities. We had also happening in urban, but it was mostly in rural communities. And so you'll be very surprised at counties here in Iowa, 27%. And this is actually county. If you look at some communities, we have over 60, 70% of the school district being Latino. It's mostly in rural areas. So this is quite a few years ago, extension in Iowa noticed that this was happening. And ever since, we have been the institution in the state that has transformed faster to adapt to the new populations. And still today, many state agencies, local agencies, they'll come to us and say, hey, we have a new group in town can you help us? And so, but again, I want you to think outside of just the ethnicity, race. And so what does your map look like? What does your programming look like? And who's there that you may not even be aware of? Who's missing in your programming?
And when we talk about community engagement, there's many different definitions of community engagement, but simply put, what we're looking to do is engage the community to achieve long-term and sustainable outcomes, processes, relationships, discourse, decision-making, and eventually implementation. And the way that we do that, I think, number one, you have to be emotionally involved and fully committed. If you're not, I think communities, they sense that, and they really don't, you're not able to build that trust that you need to move forward. And understanding that we have to mobilize the communities to mobilize resources, influence systems, and changing relationships. As Himar alluded, there's been a stark change and an increase of many different populations across the state of Iowa. But with the lack of relationship and the lack of trust, we're not able to fully engage the community in the way that we need to. So again, just number one, that emotional involvement, and then showing the community that you're fully committed into changing their situation as well as yours.
And now, thank you, Cam. I'll give you an example. About 3 years ago, we started to see a refugee population moving into our community. And somehow, I don't know, I managed to build trust and relationship with them. And then one day I was in my office and one of my clients stopped by and gave me an invitation to a wedding. And he was getting married that weekend. And I said, so he's like, it would be really nice to have you. And I said, well, I'll be there. And I don't think he quite believed me. And so I don't know what his previous experience was in other communities. And he said, he kind of stopped and he said, so are you coming? And I said, yes, I'll be there. And in fact, I told him the story that when I first started working with the Mexican population, I got invited to, all kinds of parties. And I made it because that was not typical for my culture. And I remember the first time I was a little uncomfortable, but warm up, and it was all about food and having fun and music, which is the same parties I go to. So, and so when I showed up at that wedding, I was the only non-African American in that whole, and it was a large wedding. And so it dawned on me that in our community at that point in time, I was the one that had the trust of them. And I mean, there was nobody from the school, and there was lots of kids, but no teachers. And I don't know if who invited. But the fact that I was there, I wish there would be more chauffeur community. But at that time, I would have said that was an emotional involvement. I went to the celebration not in my work time, not in my leisure time, and brought my family with me, and it was a great experience. So just be ready, because sometimes if we're working with groups who are high on the social component and relationship, you may have to do some of these things. And for example, I've held meetings at people's homes just because that's where they feel comfortable when there were some issues. And so just be ready to maybe challenge the way you do or have done work before, if you haven't been exposed to that emotional investment. And, along with that, then will come with, how do we challenge our system with recognizing, mobilizing resources when maybe extension or your organization hasn't worked before with such a population. Maybe they don't understand that population, or they may not understand the importance of working with them. So you have to ask and present on what's going on in your community and why you need those resources. But I think it starts at the emotional level, like Cam mentioned. Mm-hmm. So who are we missing, and how do we know who we're missing? And so I thought one of the challenges with extension sometimes, maybe even at the community level, is for example, in Iowa, it's been high on 4-H, and it's been very high on agriculture. And in some of those communities that we've gone to, and we have a county we have an office in every county in our state, we noticed that they didn't know that the local extension office may not know the chamber director, or they didn't have any contact at the school district. It's like, this is a small county, right? So I think that that community development it's a task that we need to master no matter what field and extension you're in. If you're in 4-H, you better have a good relationship with the school district and maybe know who they chamber, because they are the ones that see those changes first. And so while I like to look at data and the census and population estimates, really my first call is always to the school district, because if there are any families moving in, the kids are gonna go to that school. And so I have seen trends happening faster in the school district enrollment data that I've seen, wait until census or a population estimate. So in my experience, that is the fastest probably way you can see who's in your community. And they also, if you have a good relationship with the school district, they'll tell you what the challenges of those families are, and maybe connect you with those families. So that is a good, great place to start. And then obviously, we also can use the census and other population estimates. If you have a unit in your institution that deals with demographics and data, is also a good place. It kind of may validate, but in many cases, there might be a disconnect. Trends are important. If you look at that map, if I was to go back in that map, you will see that that number is only growing, and the projections for 2040 are quite impressive compared to where we're now with Latino population. A different Latino population would be more born in Iowa versus now, where it's still very immigrant based. So there's another example of don't get too comfortable in the data, and because even though it might be a group, to you might seem the same group, it's still a group that's changing all the time. So. And then, the other one is demographic of participants. If you've done a program and nobody shows up from such a specific group, or you notice that everybody from your participant list, and I challenge groups all the time where, for example, we teach leadership in communities, and I tell them who's missing, who's not here. And they'll tell us. The good thing is that they'll tell us. And many times, if they don't know the answer, we'll say, well, go look, go ask the school, and come back. And so who are we missing that next year should be in this leadership class with you, and help them bring to the table. And so those are some ways that we have used, Cam and I have used. Not the only ones, but they're the ones that to me, that to us are very useful. So we hope that they're useful for you as well.
Then going into some best practices in your outreach to audiences, first thing you'll see there is hire competent staff. We're advancing the interests of others. One thing that we always talk about at Extension is, we want a diverse and inclusive client base, but we must make sure that, our staff reflects that in our new hires. And then I think also really important is advancing the competency of our staff. One way that we feel that has worked, excuse me, is by adding some diversity objectives to our plan of work. And I think that, these objectives, they should be self-imposed. And with the understanding that diversity can be achieved in many ways. A lot of times we talk about race and ethnicity, but I don't know how many of you have went through Navigating Difference, but we look at this diversity wheel, which outlines diversity in so many different ways. So from economic backgrounds, educational standpoint, just where you come from, how you've grown up, and making sure that our staff kind of reflects our community in those several different ways, I think increases the opportunities and chance that you not only gain new participants, but then that you also retain those participants as well. Another great best practice is having an advisory committee. And this advisory committee can be made up of individuals within and outside of your organization. One example that I use there, I work with a local nonprofit that runs an after-school program for one of our elementaries here in Des Moines. And their board of directors is mainly white, so they have a little bit of work to do there when it comes to diversity and inclusion. But they run two major programs for their middle school to high school programs, or age kids. And one is the Wild Girls, and then the other is the Backyard Boys. They've done a great job of ensuring that those advisory committees are diverse, inclusive, and reflective of their client base. And they're able to give that oversight that some of the program directors might miss when dealing with some of the people from that population. And then lastly is evaluating programs and making sure that we're eliminating barriers. And one way that we do that is through mapping. And you'll see on the next slide a way that we kind of outline some of that mapping. At the top end, you'll see more of what we call a relationship map. And the example that we use here is, maybe Iowa State our extension office needs a relationship with the banks. If that's something that we don't currently have right now. But we do have a relationship with Rotary. So that's a way that we can leverage that relationship with Rotary in order to get that connection to the bank or the executives that we need as well. On the bottom half of the map, you'll see more of a geographical map. The example that I like to use here is, we see the extension office is located downtown, most likely a centralized location. We think it's a great place for us for all of our programs. But the community that we want to reach is 17 miles away, and they don't necessarily have the resources when it comes to transportation to get down there. So the questions that we have to ask ourselves is, do we hold this event or this program at an office where we feel comfortable, or do we find a partner or location within the community that we're trying to reach to make sure that we could get as many of those individuals there as possible? So outlining this in these two different ways is some great best practices to ensure that we're trying to eliminate as many barriers as possible and eliminate the barriers that we at least have control over.
And I think, thank you, Cam. I think this is two wonderful things that you can do with your community. I mean, I think it would be unfair to say it's up to you. You are the one that needs to find who's missing at the table. I think it takes a community to do that. And so this is an exercise that maybe somebody could facilitate because, they know the community and maybe you're not from that community. So they will know where those relationships are at or which ones are missing. And so the one on top is maybe more relationship, like Cam mentioned. The one downstairs might be more, maybe there are some physical barriers, like in this case with the extension office being 17 miles out in the dirt road, or the workforce office being 17 miles away from people. So it depends of which barriers you're trying to look. I'm gonna go back also because one of the things that Kim and I have talked a lot about was, sometimes in the first point with the higher cultural competence, you will see institutions that may say, well, we tried to hire and we didn't get applicants, or at this time we can't. And, it could be used as a potential, but also it could be used to say, well, we couldn't get anybody, so we're not going to deliver the program to X audience. And I want to give you an example there of my predecessor who was in my position for 38 years here in Iowa. And he was not Latino. He didn't speak Spanish. And how I got to know him is because he called me one day and he said, hey, I want to do this program with Latinos. And so, I was one of the people that he accessed to, and he was very successful implementing programs, extension programs with Latinos. And I always remember because he's still around, and he's not Latino, not speaking Spanish, but he did take the time to learn about the culture, and he managed perfectly to develop and implement. Another example would be, I am not a refugee, I am not African American, but I've been able to build a really good trust and relationship with our refugee community. So I guess probably don't want you to use these as a barrier that if you cannot hire, somebody, then maybe you say, well, too bad, versus saying, those folks at the end of the day, they still gonna live in our community and we're still not gonna serve them. So how do we go about that? One of the things is, do we reinvent or do we develop? And here's some examples, national extension that we have brought to Iowa to address some issues. One of them is Juntos from North Carolina. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that, but one of the issues we had in Iowa was that we had this rapid growth of Latinos, very young families, lots of children, with mostly the parents, the first generation parents, not having any education or having, I think at one point, the average education of Latinos in Iowa was at third grade. I mean, that's how new the population was and how immigrant-based. And so, we looked at the data. Well, number one, the school district was telling us, the kids are not graduating. They come to school and then they drop little by little, and then they don't graduate, or they're not going to college. And so this is a program that we brought to Iowa. We got trained, and we're delivering in communities in Iowa and it's specifically for first generation immigrant families to cover that gap, to close that gap in graduation and in college students among, in this case, Latino kids. But I know it could be a challenge for any immigrant group. So in this case, we didn't have to reinvent the wheel. There was a wheel out there, and they were very glad to come and teach us, and we've been implemented. Navigating Difference is another program that Cam talked about, and this is where we wanted to be more cultural competent. Until this time, we had done a lot of diversity training. A lot of us were doing diversity training, but we were just covering the basics. We hadn't gone into much deeper, which is where cultural competency comes in. And so we found a program in Washington State University, and they have been doing it for, I think, over 11 years. And so now we brought it to Iowa, and not only we have trained most of our extension staff have gone through the program, but also we have now been delivering to outside partners like school districts. We train, for example, this year, all the city managers in the city of West Des Moines, which is a very fast-growing population community. And so, again, research, see if anybody else is doing, ask around, and you may not have to reinvent the wheel. You will have to adapt it to your state and to your communities, but you have a very strong base if you have somebody else already. That's a picture I took in the city of Waterloo here in Iowa when I was delivering the program, the Juntos program out there. So again, it was bridging the first generation father, in this case, with a child who at this time was not born in Iowa either, but was in the school. So we knew that he was very, this family was very at risk of not completing college graduation, completing high school, and then going on to college. So, but in some cases, you may have to invent the wheel or develop a new program. And so, for example, here in Iowa, we have a Latino business team. We have now expanded it into immigrant business team, just because we're having a lot of immigrants who are not Latino. And so Cam is part of this program as well. And this is something that we didn't copy of anywhere. We just created in the state, and to address that very entrepreneurial spirit that immigrants have, and especially in rural communities, urban communities, most of these businesses were opening up or needing to open in places where they were dying communities, and so it was definitely very needed. But we realized that they were not being served by other partners like SCORE or SBDC, and so this is a program that it's grown a lot in our state, and we're very proud. We just got an award. That's our president giving us an award this year. So,
get into tips for success. The first, learn as much as possible about the culture as possible. I kind of think that goes without saying, but also identifying your implicit biases, about that culture. That's one huge thing I think is tough to do when it comes to self-reflection, but you do have to ask yourself some of those tough questions. But it's also good to get out to the community and ask for that feedback. If you've been in that community for a while and you have a trusted source or individual, talk to them about, what biases that may be perceived from especially people that are newer to that city or to that community. And then also go slow at first, develop those relationships, before you dive deep in offering your help, or even before asking too many personal questions. Trust is a huge thing that needs to be developed over this process. Until you obtain that, I would suggest staying away from getting too personal with the client base, and then also with yourself until you've built that relationship out. And then understand that established residents, may need additional resources to plan successful programs for new residences. An example of that, I know in about the mid-'70s, where we had our first influx of Sudanese refugees here in the Des Moines area. And many of those individuals have been able to maintain some degree of power within their community as business owners, and getting more civically engaged. But over the past 10 to 15 years, we've had another influx of African refugees. And they haven't always seen eye to eye. And even though the original population was trying to help support them, understanding that there may be generational gaps, there may be ideological gaps when that secondary migration comes by. We need to understand those differences and difficulties that they may have within their culture as we begin to work with them as well. And identifying another best practice would be identifying leaders on both sides, from folks that are maybe more established to that secondary generation that's coming into play right now.
Thank you, Cam. And I really like this slide because, that implicit bias is huge, and we all have them. And we need to be cognizant of them because if we are trying then, as we looked at one of the first slides about engagement, if we are then going to go to our institution or to our councils and ask them for resources and they have biases that we can address, then that's going to make our work easier in terms of getting those resources. But number one is, very to the point, is that if we have biases about that culture, then that's going to damage or maybe even make the work that we do with them slower. And when I started working with the refugee community, I had a lot of biases, and so one of my goals in the diversity that year was to learn more about refugees. And, of course, once you learn about, some specifics, and that answers a lot of the questions that I had, that our brain feels immediately with something either negative or just, well, that's the way they are. Or, well, they're this way because, and then you fill in the blank. And so I think that first one, it's very key, as Cam mentioned. And the last one is also very, very good. And it would be the example I also share, which I love, the one Kameron used. If I'm doing something for my daughter, I'm planning a weekend for my daughter, and I do it without consulting, how do you think that's going to go, right? She's going to go, well, that was lame, right? So I think it would be helpful if I ask her, hey, what do you want to do this weekend that's so fun? Or, and so that would be definitely a way to go about it, and it would increase your ways of having a successful program. So sometimes we think we know what people need, and the data might show us, but we don't quite understand the reasons or how to get there. So.
Mm-hmm. Then we'll go through 9 practical steps. The first one, I think we have additional slides to go through after this, but I think we're going to use those for you to review later. But the first one is learning about new audiences. We got to get an understanding of who that new audience is, where they come from, what are their values, their history and culture, having a full understanding of that. Where did they come from? And I think when you think of where did they come from, not just geographically, but also, what type of environment did they come from as well, right? Did they come to America or to your community seeking economic sustainability, or are they asylum seekers seeking, peace and prosperity? And then also, what is the ratio from adults to children? As Himar mentioned earlier, over the course of the past, few decades, we've seen a huge influx of the Latino population, and many of them are young adults or children. And also, what languages do they speak? Many English is not going to be the first language, and some it's not going to be the first, second, or third dialect that they speak as well. So going forward, we just get into full understanding of who that audience is. The second one is networking with service providers. Determining who has the new audience trust and attention is very key, right? And that could be individuals, community leaders, or organizations. It's important to make sure that we're meeting with these local service providers who already are engaging with these communities, because that really builds that trust for us, and it allows us to come through as a conduit through an already trusted individual or organization. And then third, interacting with new residents and key leaders. We have to spend time with them, visiting and socializing before we even come in and decide we want to help them or what work that we want to do. And that socializing can happen. The best places would be churches, your sporting events, festivals, schools, businesses, or if we're lucky enough, like Himar, go to one of their weddings. But finding any way possible to continue to build that relationship before we even start hitting the ground and working. But again, make sure that you're paying attention to their concerns, listening way more than we talk. My rule of thumb is if I'm talking more than they are, I'm not learning enough, right? And they're not going to they're not going to be able to ensure a trusted individual that they're going to be able to give their needs out. And then develop trust and respect, building those personal relationships, and understanding the hierarchy in these new audiences as well. Sometimes we may see an organization or a group of individuals that we really want to affect, but without going through the proper hierarchy, we can't really get any traction. And sometimes that means going through their pastor, means going through their community leader, but making sure the right individuals who can really create some traction for us and help build that trust for us are key activators in the process as well.
So one of the dangers, I guess, of building a wonderful relationship and trust with the community can be that community sees you as the institution. And I'll give you an example, if the refugee community knows Himar and they come and see him and he takes, he addresses their educational needs and helps them grow and this is fun. And then Himar because he gets so tired of the cold weather and beautiful cold weather here in Iowa, moves to Georgia. And then what happens to their relationship? Is it gone from the institution? Do they know that Iowa State will be here to take care of that education need, or is the relationship totally broken? And so that's something that we struggle when we've had staff turnover, that then it seems like we've lost all relationships and we have to start from zero. And so, how do we go about building that? And I think I don't have a silver bullet answer there, but I guess some of the things is it makes a difference if the institution is buying into these new efforts versus just you. If it's just you and they're not bought in and they don't, for example, when I started with Extension, I was the only staff working with Latinos. Well, there's 8 or 9 of us. So if I leave tomorrow, then there's still 8 folks that can continue that work. And so, how do we make it part of the system versus based on one person? It's really hard. I know Kameron is very respected in Des Moines, and gosh, he's not going to leave us anytime in the next 50 years. So how do we transfer that trust into the institution? And trust is transferable. We've opened doors with our new populations, for example, with chambers, where the chamber or the Main Street District wanted to talk to Ramon, who owns the grocery store downtown. They don't know him. They can't seem to build a relationship with him. So I go in, I say, hey, Ramon, this is Fred from Main Street. They're going to be applying for a grant to put in new lights. Would you like to be part of it? We need your support. Could you say, sure. Hey, this is Fred. You don't need to call me if you have a question about the lights. You can call Fred. Or by the way, Fred, you don't need to. Now you know Ramon. If language is not an issue, which in many cases it's more, maybe less of an issue as we think. You can call each other. And by the way, Fred's office is only 2 doors away from your store. We've had that happen. And so, transfer that trust. And the other thing is make sure is that you build relationships and you don't keep them to yourself, even though you build and you work really hard on those. We really would not be doing a good job to those folks or to our institution if we don't help spread that relationship and build those relationships. And the truth is that those partners need help building relationships. They, like I said, we've had cases where the chamber was next door to the Mexican store and they didn't know each other and nobody was, seemed to be able to get over that, how to build relationship. And so in this case, I think this is a very natural place with Extension. With our facilitation that we have, best practices, seen as a very neutral partner, we can take that role of building the community relationships. And then at some point we might need to step back and say, you already build a relationship. I don't need to be at every single meeting that you have with Maria or with Pedro. You guys need to trust each other and build your relationship. So I think we have time to go through the slides. We didn't know if we're gonna get here, but we wanted to put them in here, and then we also want to make sure we have time for questions and answers. So maybe, Cam, do you want to take the next 3 ones and?
All right. Well, we talked through the first 3. Do you want to?
Oh, you're talking about the first 3 ones. Sorry, I thought you went through that. My bad. So yeah, you're right. Who are the new audiences? And we talked about how do you go over that? How do you figure out what does new audience mean? What are the values, history, and that's where that cultural development comes into play. And like I said, years ago, we had it in our annual evaluations. The question is, what is your diversity goal for the year? And it was an open-ended question. People got to put whatever they wanted. And then we went away with that. And it was just funny that we were doing this presentation because we are going to put them back for next year. And hopefully it should never come off because, again, every community is changing and staff should be able to always be growing in diversity knowledge or exploring who is new in the community or to the program. So, if it helps you, where they come from and so on. So, but you did go over these. So network with service providers, determine, if there's somebody already who has that trust in the community, then you can then tag along and build that trust. But you may not be the first one again. Maybe some school districts are really good in, if they have maybe an outreach coordinator, or if they have a parent coordinator or somebody who's doing relationship in the community, then they might have that trust, and you just come and like we said, trust is transferable, so they shouldn't be keeping that to themselves. They should be sharing that with you and maybe let you in the school and do projects. We have done programs before in basements of churches just because we knew that that's where they went. We knew that they trusted the church. We knew that they didn't know where the extension office was. They didn't know what extension was. And so we went every Sunday and did a program in the church. And so you may have to go out to where they're at and not wait for them to come into your door. So interact with new residents. We talked about that. Pay attention to the concerns. Again, we might think we know what they need, and maybe that's not a reality, or maybe it's a different degree compared to what our needs are. And we could have a personal finance class, but if that family thinks that they're sending money back home and we're talking to them about credit cards, that might not be, maybe that's not where their debt is coming from, or that's where not the resources. And so we could be talking about them not buying the Chinese car. Well, that's not, maybe that's where their money is going. It's to something that they feel is important, like supporting their family somewhere else. And so, listen to the concerns, let them tell you what their issue is. And I think Cam touched on this as well, of, understand the hierarchy within the new audience. And this is sometimes a little uncomfortable. It definitely gets you outside of if it's outside of our norm, it might be their norm, and we need to understand that, how to go about it. So this one is on communicate and cooperate, build social capital. So again, we talked about the importance of trust, cooperation, that, we don't want for one side to win and the other one to lose. There has to be a benefit to both organizations. Share symbols. Maybe it is an example of this would be, maybe the thing that unites us is that both we're in the school together, or our children are in the school together, so education is important to us. Or it could be that we live in the same community, and so we have some things that we share. So maybe explore those touch points where there would be some relationship, some things that are common. So about mutual benefit, collective identity, and then again, that, sorry to bring it back, but that it's very important, that emotional involvement. We have, and Kim, I've lost count of the slides, so I know we were going by slides, so feel free to stop.
No worries. Develop a shared vision. We got to understand that vision needs to be something that's communicated to the communities that we're trying to impact, but it has to be their vision as well. We can't be an organization or institution coming in and creating a plan for them. We have to make sure that, you know, we're on the same page of where that goes, and that means planning with people and not for them. Listen as much as possible, making sure that knowing that every person is capable of providing something of value to the mission and the end goal. And then each member of the community, you know, expected to give and gain, right? They're going to put in some hard work. We're going to put in some hard work, and hopefully we all gain at the end of it. And I think at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that there's clarity around that goal, whether it be a big lofty goal or something that we're just trying to get done for one event. We want to make sure that we're both on the same page on what that vision looks like.
And I think one of the things that are very important that Cam just mentioned is, you know, that people know what the expectations are of this relationship. And so if there is a fee in a program, we need to let them know, you know, and if this is a study, you know, we need to let them know that this might not be a program that they can benefit from next year. If it's a 1-year study, they might love it. And we've had that situation where they didn't understand that it was a study. They thought it was a class. And then next year, people say, hey, we heard that my neighbor took this class and there was some incentives and we went to take it too. We thought it sounded really good. And it's like, oh, sorry, you know, that was a 1-year program. So a research project. And so we need to be, I think, very clear what the expectations are, and that should help with the trust. I think there's nothing worse to damaging trust if there are things that one of the parts don't know about each other, or there are hidden agendas or hidden items that are not shared. So keep it simple, repeat the message. And this is something that I have, the repeat is something I've learned to do. So for example, if we have a multi-week or multi-monthly program where we're meeting once a month, or we're meeting every other week or something like that, where that repeat message is very important and very simple. So for example, I will say, hey, remember, we're meeting 2 weeks from now on Wednesday at 5 p.m. right here. That, in my experience, is not enough. You will have to call in the next week, and you may have to call the day before, and then they'll show up. But if you don't, they may know. So they may not. So the repeating, it's very important. You know, if you're dealing with people who maybe communities who are, you know, have so many things going, or maybe this is not the way they've never attended an educational program before, or it could be a lot of things. But they keep it simple and repeating, it is something that we definitely use and that we recommend. Patient persistent. I remember when I started in this work that the first few times I put the meeting together for the business owners, nobody showed up. And the last time I was going to do it, I'm like 3 out of the 16 people that I had invited showed up, and I was getting ready to say, you know, there's no interest, I'm ready to go. And the meeting, I remember that morning, it was, I said 8 o'clock, and everybody, those 3 showed up at 8 o'clock, and it was like 8:20 when I was said, you know, maybe no, this is not the best use of our time, we need to wrap it up. And as I was picking up, I had just packed everything in a box, and the next 3 business owners come in, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, so, you know, maybe now we need to start. And then by the time breakfast ended, we had the 16 business owners there. But I was ready to wrap it up in 20 minutes, not understanding that, you know, these were business owners who had been, you know, they were in many cases, they're the only ones working at the store, so they might be running late. And so after that experience, I started to ask the question, when do you want to meet and where? And so they told us, they said, why don't we take turns moving around? And this month we'll meet in this grocery store. Next month we meet at the bakery, Latino bakery, and next month. So that will make it easier on the owners. And then instead of 8, can we do 9? Because by the time my spouse had come in to open the store and I can step out, like, okay, well, that makes a difference, versus me assuming that everybody wants the 8 o'clock and get done with. It'd be like setting a meeting at 8 o'clock with parents, right? They're not going to show up. They're still taking their kids at 8 o'clock and they may not be done with that process. So be patient, persistent, and ask them to give you a sense of direction and help you with the momentum as well.
Mm-hmm.
And Cam, feel free to jump, but get early success stories, start off slowly and grow the program. I think we need to celebrate, and when we don't do that as often or as well as we should. And I think we need to, especially if you're working with communities where this might be your first time working with them or the first success, that can carry long ways. And number one, it's not going to make you feel good about the work that you're doing. But then if you are able to celebrate that you helped Maria open her store, and all of a sudden, maybe down the road, there's somebody else who has been thinking about opening a business for many years, but now they see that, this guy is for real. And he has nothing to gain from that, so we need to celebrate. And so, my experience is we're shy about asking for, participants and clients to be part of the success story. And my experience has been every time I ask, they don't mind getting in that picture. They don't mind if we put them on the flyer. And so just make sure you ask them and that you have the tool. But I have never had, and at one point our reporting system, for example, internally for extension, you'll say, how much did this business make last year? And I'm like, oh, I've never asked that to anybody. That's like asking your neighbor, how much does she make or he makes? And so I tried it one time and I said, I helped you open last year your doors. I got your permits and I helped you with finance. How much have you made? And they've always told us, and they've never, we tell them it's not something we're going to share with your competitor, but it is something that will help us know if, and calculate the impact and help us sometimes we have to justify the work that we do. And people will ask questions. Well, why is it working with little business owners important? Well, because, that store that he opened, he's selling $200,000 worth of whatever he's selling a year. So we need to know those add up, obviously. So, and make sure you give them credit and celebrate with them, and they will love that recognition. And so if I take a picture of a business owner or a client like the one you saw with the diploma, I made them a copy and I framed it for them because I knew they had been through 8 weeks with us, and they were there every time. And, he worked and the child went to school and it was very hard on the family. They made it through and, I wanted to celebrate with them. So give them credit as well. So.
Yeah, to add on to that, one thing that I also like to do a lot is to talk to my clients about them getting in the community and telling their friends, their family members, other community members about the work that we do. We can do as much social media posting as we want, but sometimes the best form of advertisement is word of mouth. And just having a quick conversation with them, about the type of work that we do and the other opportunities that we have to offer, that they can just talk about it in simple conversations, with their client base, with their family, with their friends at church. And I've seen a lot of success in getting new clients that come to different programs, but because they've heard it from such and such who we work with during a boot camp, or somebody that we work with putting together a business plan. When they get excited, that excitement shows and I think it reverberates through the community, and it is a great way for us to not only retain their participation, but also to recruit new folks into the fold as well.
And so 8 of those 9 suggestions would be to, again, we talked about win-win situations, if it fits within our mission, and if it's not, then just say it up front. I think they'll be okay. One of the things I like to do is say, well, we don't do that, or I can't do that, but, let me pick up the phone because I know somebody who can do that. And many times, you will see, and I see it every day, where they'll say, well, if you go 3 blocks from here, and knock on this is the address, then they might help you. And what ends up happening is that this person, if they're new to the community, they don't speak the language, if they don't have the relationship built, or they don't have a vehicle, guess what happened? They don't go there. And so, so you, instead of being that partner that builds relationships and help people, you may have just, in this case, not done any help. And I remember yesterday I had this old couple walk into my office, and they were retired, and they were looking for a place to live. And I said, well, and I said it, well, if you go down 3 blocks from here is the housing office. They have wonderful resources. And then I stopped myself and I said, here I am doing it again. And I said, hold on 1 minute. And I pick up the phone and I call, and I said, do you have time? There's this old couple that's going to be coming down. They need, they need to fill up an application. And the lady said, do they speak English? And I said, no, they don't. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was going to send these folks down there. They don't speak the language. Nobody will understand each other. And the lady said, well, hold on. Let me call our interpreter. Let me see when he can come in, and we'll set up an appointment. Don't hang up. We're going to do it right now. Set up the appointment. And so by the time that couple walked out of my office, they had an appointment. They know where they're going. They know that somebody's going to be there who can represent their language and the culture and do that versus, just go. And as we are going to assume that they're going to make that connection. So, if we don't do what they need, I think we can still build that relationship. We can still build, and our partners will appreciate it. And these ladies, thank you for sending them our way. We have an opening, and we can, and they qualify. So, but it's so easy to just that personal step, just go over it. So. Evaluate, change, do it again. It's something that we're very strong in our programming. So we evaluate, and we hear what people tell us, and we need to retrieve every prompts we do. If we don't, we don't. And so, the way I like to say is, okay, Himar, you had 25 people who came to this class. That's wonderful, but that's not the impact, right? That's just a measurement. The impact is, of those 25 who came to your class, how many end up using the tool that you gave them? Or how many did go ahead and open a bank account? Or how many of those opened a business? So that is the other question. And I didn't make this up. My previous supervisor, I remember I was telling him one day, oh, we had this many people attend. And he looked at me and said, so what? And I was like, oh my God, because he was not the type of person that would have ever said that. And I was totally froze. And so then he smiled and he said, don't take it the wrong way. I am really saying, so what does that mean? But he loved to say it, so what? And it was so on him, but it opened my eyes. I'm like, you're right. The numbers it's a measure, but it's not the true impact. So make sure you dig and beyond that and see if what you're doing is helping people move forward. So this is our last slide. So who are our underserved agency? These are questions for you, right? Who is not in your programming? Who's not in your audience? Who is missing? Or how are you serving those audiences? And again, underserved, I don't want you to just think racial. I don't want you to just think ethnicity. It could be whatever it is, whoever is not there. And so again, explore your biases when you're working with that group, and that will help eliminate a lot of the barriers. And one of the things in that map that we saw before was invisible barriers. And we didn't have that there, but I do ask groups after we're done with that wonderful exercises, okay, what are the barriers that we can see in this map that are barriers? And you'll be surprised what kind of answer you get, but people start thinking outside of the box of, oh, okay, well, I was just thinking physical barriers. Well, yes, but how about these or how about that? That might be more, I hate to say them simple, but they're more invisible. So that's our wonderful mugshots right there, our contact information. And now we open it up for questions.
Thank you, Himar and Kameron. If anyone has questions, you can put it in the chat box or turn on your mic and ask. I have some questions myself. So let's see. Craig, you have a question?
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious. In our state, you know, we have a lot of different foreign language media outlets. We have, you know, Spanish language TVs and radios, and we even seem to have a number of, we have a large Vietnamese population. We have almost neighborhood kind of newspapers. Do you have any suggestions working with these folks? Have you worked with media outlets, and what was your experience?
I'll speak, and Cam, please feel free to jump in. Yes, we have built really good relationship with media and business owners who are from other audiences, and we've been very successful. Where in most cases we never have to pay for an ad; they'll put our information up, and it's very. We've been very successful, and we keep using those media outlets. I would say we have, maybe I don't know the ones I don't know, but mostly with the Latinos, because I work with, we utilize, and we have newspapers, we have the radio station, and I'm on that radio station 3 or 4 times a year. And again, they've never charged us a dime for programs. So I would say that in my experience, those have been high emotional relationships. So I know, you know, Lorena and Ramon at the radio station. I mean, I've known them. I've been to their kids' weddings and quinceañeras, and they've been to my house. So I mean, that's what that emotional. Now, I'm not saying you should do that with every one of them, but you know, in our case, it's a small community, 25,000 people, so we're able to do that. Kem, do you have some idea?
Yeah, my experience is very similar to yours. Haven't been to too many birthday parties, but
I just like food.
Yeah. But with the radio stations, we have 2. One, I would say, black-owned radio station. Another that is an urban type radio station. But I've been able to build a relationship with either the station owner or an individual that's running the show for that day. The black-owned station. Like Himar, I'm on there probably 6 or 7 times a year. And they never charge, because typically I'll do it as an interview or something like that, where or throughout the newspapers, we'll do an interview instead of an actual paid ad. And that's helped us get our message out there without having to put up any cash. But it's really just comes down to building a relationship with either one of the personalities, or if you're lucky enough, as Himar is, with somebody who actually runs the business.
Thank you.
Has there been any challenges with the current political climate? Have people like pulled back? Have you found that any changes in the communication environment with folks?
Sorry, Cam, I just always jump in, but
yeah, I'll let you take that one first.
you know, we haven't. I haven't seen that. And I think, or I haven't heard any of my staff either heard that. Because mostly what we do is, you know, it's open to the public. We don't have, you know, what we do is we don't ask, when we do a program, we don't ask for social security numbers. We don't ask for address. I mean, we just want a name and a phone number. So we've never, you know, had, you know, those issues in terms of that. And a lot of that we do, I mean, we have the ground support of it, you know, because we're opening business, and that's something, you know, that's very hard to argue against. Or we have, we're working with population who is already in the school district. So it's not like we're saying we're bringing new people to the state, which in Iowa, actually, you know, we went through many years of decline. And so, maybe at the past we have seen opportunity, but you know what we do is I think it's not, yeah, I don't know how to say, but I've been asked a question many times and I've never known how to respond, except I haven't seen it, just because I think the nature of the work, and also because I think extension is very respected in our state, and it's very seen as a very neutral, non-political organization. So I think that's a hat that I definitely benefit from having on.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of that, just, being that we're research-based, very nonpartisan, middle of the road. I don't know who's going to complain with somebody opening up businesses, whether it be Democrat or Republican. But I've seen a lot of support. I guess I've seen support from both sides more so than anything. I think it's just up to us to make sure that we stay that line and stay that course and understand why we're coming into a community, and just communicating this is not that we're not trying to politicize anything. We're here to help and support as much as possible. And then always, I think, staying home to that research-based institution and that trust that a lot of individuals have within the Iowa State, period. I think it's helped us stay above that fray.
And I think a lot of the things that we do with minorities or underserved populations because nobody else is doing. And so we've never gotten any heat from any other organizations that helping open business like SBA or CDC about, why are you helping Latinos open business? Because they know they don't have those relationships. They know they're not getting those folks. So, if somebody else is doing it, we're not going to do it. So we tend to come in and say, this is an issue. Nobody's addressing it, or nobody's coming in to raise the score of Latino children in Iowa, or whatever program CAM might be doing. So we don't like to replicate other things or compete against other. If somebody's addressing the issue, then if we provide tools, or we might provide research or best practices, but we're not going to deliver. So the things that we do actually deliver as programs because nobody else is doing them. It's being identified by those communities as a need. They're the ones that call us and say, hey, we're having this issue. Can you come and help us?
Right.
So Himar, in terms of communication with the Latino communities, like brochures, flyers, do you produce those yourself, or do you have support from the university communications department producing Spanish materials?
Yeah, we don't. I used to print it myself when I was the only one, because they would say, well, we don't have anybody speak Spanish, or we don't know what it says. But now we do print them centrally. We have total support. In fact, like I said, I was the first person doing the line of work, and over the years we just keep adding. So I think we do have the support, and I think it is communities calling or telling their representatives or telling their mayors, this is an issue. We need more people. And so I was driving to Sioux City, 6 hours away, to try to help that community with the Latino population, and those communities we were not covering, but we've been able to justify that this is something that nobody else was doing, that we needed to make it into a program. We need to have a team. And with that team, like any other team at Iowa State, comes resources. You're doing your job, and we'll print, we'll help you with whatever you need. And we do have, I was worried at the beginning because we do have a, what is it called, Kameron? The Iowa English only law. It's a state law that passed many years ago, and my thought was we cannot print anything in Spanish, but it didn't apply to educational institutions. And so another thing, so it's not what I had thought. So once I learned more about it, I was like, okay, we can get around this in this way. So we haven't had any trouble printing materials in other languages or centrally.
That's great. Well, we're up with time, and I'd like to thank Himar and Kameron again for presenting for us. This has been recorded. We'll send out a link later on. I did have a question from someone else asking if the presentation itself, the slides, would be available. Do you have a link for that later on?
I can send it to you, Victor, or Craig, or both, and I don't know how you want to then distribute it, or.
Well, we could put a link on our website and have people download it from there.
Awesome.
Appreciate it. Thank you much, everyone. And we'll send out that communication later. Have a great rest of your day.
All right,
Thank
thank
you,
you, guys.
everybody. Take care.